Currently, the global food supply chain, as you just heard, has not really been disrupted. Supply chains are stable. Farmers are able to produce enough food to really feed the world. But here's the caveat, what I call panic purchasing. Panic purchasing by consumers, that's when you go out to the grocery stores and you see that all the flour on the grocery store aisle is gone. What that causes is bulk purchasers. So we talk about countries or big bulk purchasers of things like corn and wheat and rice. They get very nervous that they might not be able to have product in May, June, July. So they start purchasing even higher bulk quantities right now. And what that does, it drives prices up. And that ultimately affects low income countries, right? So if prices go high, then you see food shortages really directly impact low income countries, particularly those in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East first. So while supply chains in developed nations might not be, that impacted, those developing countries do see some of those repercussions of some of the panicked consumers in the U.S.
Taylor, earlier in my career, I worked in Salinas, California, which is known as the salad bowl of the world, huge agricultural region. But a lot of the stories I did were on migrant workers. They work very closely together in the fields. They live in cramped camps. Is this virus, if it starts sweeping through these communities, you get the sense there won't be any workers in the field. How concerning is that, and how do you mitigate that issue?
Right. So the American Farm Bureau just put out a report, and, farmers are taking extra precautions, right? Some of these workers are in, for instance, strawberries are having a little bit of a supply chain issue right now because they harvest strawberries in groups of 30 individuals at a time that are picking strawberries. So these farmers are really trying to minimize those groups of harvesters to less than 10 people. They're supplying extra hygiene like hand sanitizer and hand washing capabilities. They're wearing masks. So the agriculture industry is responding. Here's what I'm worried about. At least in the United States, about 20% of farm labor are workers that come in with temporary visas from Mexico. And right now our government is restricting those. So particularly for the produce industry, where it's a very intensive labor industry, there might be some real shortages in produce due to we just won't have the labor force to harvest the crop.
So the labor force issue, panic buying, worst case scenario, what about the capacity of major food exporters like the United States, Australia, and Canada to meet the demand as they respond to this virus?
Right. So domestically, these developed countries can meet their own demand. Here in the U.S., only about 15% of our food is imported. So from a domestic side, the developed countries can sustain themselves. Again, where this really hits hard are low-income countries, because if food prices skyrocket, then governments have to do things like compensate for other essential services like healthcare and education in order to pay for the food that's needed to feed their population. And that's when things get really, really tricky.